Arceon is my absolute favorite plugin for building, and I want to teach you how to use it. You will need to become a patron to Arcaniax to get access to this plugin. I'll provide a link to his Patreon in the description. Once you have it ready on your server, we can start. This video is all about terrain and some simple commands for that, including Terragen, River, and Smooth Snow. The first command I'm going to show you is Terragen. This is very useful for creating very basic terrain, or at the very least, a good foundation for better terrain. I have the full command written out there, but I'm going to break it down and show you one little piece at a time. First thing you're going to have to do is select an area. You can use the cuboid, sphere, cylinder, or poly selections to use Terragen, but first thing I'm going to do is just show you when you type it out without actually entering anything else, it's going to show you all of the available noise types for this command. Now I do have examples set up already of all of these noise types, so I'm just going to go show you those instead of running the command here. For these examples, I use the same command of Terragen, a noise type, a block type, and a height for the terrain. It's the same command for all these examples with just the noise type changing. Using that command I just showed you, this is the simplex pattern. As you can see, it is very smooth. Moving on, we have fractal and billowy. You can see the difference there. Some of these have very subtle differences though, because billowy and ridged also look very similar. I did notice some height differences between these, but again, there are other subtle differences I'm sure that I'm just not aware of. It's all math and I'm not very good at math, so I accept that there are differences. Then after ridged, we have turbulence. This looks very similar to the fractal as well, but again, has a slight difference. And this is the electric pattern. This also looks similar to some of the others. I did notice that it has some deeper creases inside some of these hilly areas. And over here we have Euclidean, and you can see all the stair-steppy stuff going on here. It's really, really cool. Oh, and also you'll see in these last two examples how I used a cylinder and poly selection to create the landscape. So just once again showcasing that you can use different selection types to create the landscape. Moving on, we've got Manhattan and natural. These are also very similar to Euclidean, but again, there are very subtle differences if you look carefully enough. And then finally, we have poly, which is vastly different from all of the others. It's creating all these giant polygon mountains. And that's the basic noise types, and it's just showing you the rough form of these. However, depending on how we run the command, of course, you can change the look of all of these depending on all the extra numbers that you can add to the command. So this is just a quick look at all the different types, but you can modify them if you add more to the command when you run it. Now let's play with this a little more organically. This is actually really fun to mess around with, and first I'm just going to make a big selection like this, and we're just going to experiment and I'll fill in some of the other things. So that command I did for all of those was Terragen. We'll do simplex noise type, then my block type, which I'm doing iron blocks, and then the height. Last time I did 30, so we'll do 30 again. The next number is zoom, and by default the zoom is 1. So if I do it with a zoom of 1, you'll see what it's going to create. If we increase the number of the zoom, it's like it's zooming in on your landscape and enlarging that pattern. So if we made the zoom a little bit higher, like 3, you'll see it's going to zoom in on that landscape, so it's not nearly as hilly as it was before. And the same works for all of them. So if I wanted to do something like fractal, it's got a little bit more bumps involved with it. So let's do fractal. And that's what a zoom on a fractal noise type looks like if we wanted to try it on the poly, because that one's really fun to play with. We'll try it on poly with a zoom, and you'll see it makes much shallower mountains when you zoom in on it. The next number that you can add to the command is wave, and this affects kind of the bumpiness of the terrain and the waviness of it. I really don't know a better way to describe it. It really is just the waviness of the terrain. Let me go back to the simplex one, and we're going to add a wave. By default, it is 0, so if we add a wave of 1, we'll see a slight difference here. Actually, I want to take off that zoom because it's easier to see without the zoom. So we'll make the zoom 1. Let's make the wave 3, a little bit higher than it was before. And you'll see what that did. It's still the simplex pattern, but now all of the edges are wavy and bumpy. If you want to try it on something else, let's try it on the Euclidean patterns. Let's do Euclidean. We'll keep everything else the same and run that command. So there is a wavy Euclidean, and you remember how it was kind of like stair steps, but now each stair step looks like it's all wavy and bumpy, which is interesting. Also, a good thing to note is every single time you run this command, it's going to give you a different seed, a different orientation of the pattern. If you want to keep the same seed or the same pattern as the previous time you entered the command, there is a flag that you can use for that. So I have this pattern that I just created, and I want to recreate that exact same pattern next time I run this command. I just want to make a minor adjustment to it, but I do like this pattern. So I'm going to add the -s flag to keep that same seed, but I can make a slight adjustment to it, maybe a little less wavy. So now it's got the same seed and we've adjusted it ever so slightly. That is the -s flag. The next flag is the -v flag that we can use to vignette the sides of the selection, so it's not just a straight edge. And this will only work with the cuboid and sphere selection. It does not work with the poly selection if you want to make one of those cool selection types. So that's just something to note. If we wanted this to also connect to the ground, we can add the V. You could do it standalone, but I want to keep the same seed as before too, so we'll try that. And you'll see how that's going to connect it down to the ground. That's very useful, especially if you just want to make sure the edges are all nice and cleaned up and you don't have to do that with a brush. It's a nice quick way to get a clean edge. The next flag I'm going to show you, let me undo this pattern that I have there. I still have my selection, by the way. It's just hidden right now because it's easier to see without it showing. The -e flag will take the next Terragen command we run and layer it on top of existing terrain. So I have this simplex pattern, but I want to add some polygon Terragen on top of this. So it's going to layer the two together. Let's do Terragen and poly, and we'll do a different block type just so you can see it a little more clearly, but we'll do the same numbers for everything else. 31 and then -e for layering it on top of existing terrain, and we'll go ahead and run that. It took the existing terrain as the base, so it's going 30, I guess, height above that. So that's probably a little bit extreme, but you'll see it was following the pattern of the simplex, and maybe it would be easier to see if I adjusted my command slightly, because that did kind of go into the ground a bit. Let's try doing a height of 10 instead, and you can see how it follows that simplex pattern. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be one Terragen command on top of another to use that. It's just layering it on top of any existing terrain. So it doesn't have to be 2 Terragen commands, but that's what it's doing. Before I move on to the other flags, I do want to note that sometimes I like to layer the Terragen terrain on top of each other without using flags. So let's say I had the simplex, but I wanted to add poly to it. Let's just take that -e flag off. This time it is layering them, but it's just layering them based off of the selection, not based off of the existing terrain, if that makes sense. So you can layer them based on the selection that you have on the ground, or layer them using the -e flag, where it bases the new command off of the highest point, I suppose, in the selection, or the existing terrain. The next flag only works with the Euclidean, Manhattan, and natural noise pattern types. So if we're doing one of those, let's do Terragen, let's do Manhattan, if I can spell it correctly, and we'll do our block type, our height, we'll just do all these same things, but if we add the -r flag, what it's going to do is randomize some of the noise in there. So when I add the -r, it adds a bunch of varying heights to all those different layers, which creates a very interesting terrain. Now I'm completely getting distracted, but what if I took that and did Terragen simplex 42 10 1 -e. then it's kind of smoothed off some of those edges. Anyway, this tool is so much fun to play with. I need to move on though because we have one more flag to show. The last flag is the -N flag. This only works with the fractal, billowy, ridged, turbulence, and electric patterns. And it, again, it's just going to add more noise to our terrain. So let me run Terragen. We'll do ridged. We'll do 42, 30, and we'll do -N for more noise. And you'll see it made it much noisier than what we had over here. So that's a comparison of without the -R flag, and with the -R flag, you can just tell it's got more holes in it and it's just noisier all around. And of course, I'm sure it's more obvious if you actually experimented with the zoom and the wave. If we did a zoom of 2, for example, and then did that, so that's with the -N, and then this is without the -N, you can clearly see a difference. It's kind of similar to the wave effect, honestly, but again, it's just nice to have all these options. You can experiment with them and just come up with a variety of different outcomes. I'm not much of a terrain builder myself, but Terragen has proven to be far easier to make terrain than doing it in other ways. Of course, you can combine other methods of making terrains on top of this. If nothing else, I think it makes a very good foundation for better terrain. Or if you only need simple terrain like I often do for my larger builds, then this is perfectly sufficient by itself. The next few commands, we will need some existing terrain so I can show you how to use it. So let's go ahead and generate something very simple. How about a Terragen Simplex 231.3? That gives us this landscape right here. And this looks beautiful, minus that little annoying gap right there. Let me fix that. This looks beautiful and the perfect foundation for the next command. I'm going to show you the river command. You're going to need the convex selection in order to use this command. So let's make sure we've got that. Actually, you're going to have to do select convex on your wooden axe. And then you're simply going to select the path you want your river to go on your terrain. It doesn't matter if there's a hill, if there's a valley, you just select wherever you want the river to go, and the command will do all the work for you. There you can see my selection and see how it zigzags across. And then we're simply going to enter the command river, and next we'll enter the block that we want the river to be. Typically, a river is made out of water, so we're going to do water. The next two numbers are the start and end depth of the river, and really the best thing to do is just to experiment with those two numbers. So let's just say I want the start depth to be 4 and end depth to be 6. I don't know what that's going to look like, but we're going to try it. And let's go ahead and enter that first with just what we have so we can see what it's doing. So here we've got the river kind of not cutting into that mountain perfectly, but then it cuts through the rest of the terrain there. I wonder if changing the depth will help it get over that little bump there. So let me try it. Let me try making the depth either shallower or deeper. I'm not sure which will work better. So let's try making it deeper toward the start. All right, that helped it a little bit. That helped it kind of connect a little better there. So there you've got the basic river. You can see how deep it's going toward the middle. And I think it also depends on how much terrain you have below it, because if it goes too deep and you don't have enough terrain below it, then it's going to get cut short. So that's something to keep in mind too. We can also enter a third number to this command for the decline of the river, and this is talking about the steepness of the edges of the river. And actually, let me just undo this so we can see it from the beginning. By default, the decline is 1. If we made the decline 2, which is quite steep, the edges of our river are going to be practically straight. And the river is a little bit narrower because of that. So we just made our river edges very steep, almost like it's running through a canyon. But if we wanted it to be a little bit less than that, again, here's what 1 looks like. It's not quite as steep. If we want the edges of the river to be less steep, then we simply need to enter a number that's less than 1. So let's try 0.5 for the decline. And you'll see it definitely has made the river a little bit wider and a little less steep on the sides. This hill is just very big, so it's going to be a bit steep there, but we could try going even smaller than that. it just has to be something above 0. If we tried something like 0.1, then we'll get an extra wide river with very shallow edges. And it does mess up a little bit over here, but again, that could just be because of the depth we're choosing. Maybe if it's wider, you need to choose a bigger number for the depth. Let me try it with a bigger depth with that wide river. We'll just do 10 all the way across. And wow, the depth also does make it wider. So all these things kind of add on to each other. Depth makes it wider, a shallower decline makes it wider, and of course making the decline bigger will make a narrower river. For now, I'm just going to keep this river at something like this. I think this looks good for this terrain that we've got going here. There are a couple flags we can use with a river, one of them being the -S flag, and this will smooth out any liquid or snow layers. So if you are using a liquid like water or lava, or if you're using snow, then it can smooth it all out a little nicer. Since we're using water, this would apply to us. And if you look over here where the water is falling down, you'll notice how right now it's falling down a full block right there and there. But if we regenerate this river using the -S, so let's undo that. We'll just add -S, and it should smooth out all of those full blocks, so now they're more gradual in their decline. And that's simply all it does, but it does only apply to just a few types of block types. The other flag for river is the -N flag, and this does what you might expect. It just adds a little bit of noise to the path of our river. It's going to make it much wavier as it goes across the terrain and makes it look a little more natural, I think. And I do believe every time you enter this command, it's going to be slightly different. It's a completely random noise that it's applying to your river. Sometimes I get something like this where it doesn't look quite right, but again, it's just very random in how it's generating this. So we'll just keep trying until we get something that looks good again. The next command I want to show you adds a little bit of snow to this terrain that we have here. And you can see I took the liberty to paint a little bit of stone in here, and that's just so I can demonstrate this command more easily. I've got multiple types of blocks to work with. So first thing you're going to have to do is select all of your terrain where you want the snow applied. I already have my selection, but I will hide it so it doesn't get in the way as I'm showing this to you. And to add snow to our terrain, we're just going to enter the command smooth snow, and I believe you can also abbreviate it to SS, but I'm just going to type it out. Smooth snow, and the next number will be the smoothness of the snow. And it's going to be easier for me to explain how this works in my mind if I just show you first. So I'm going to enter a small number like 2, and we'll see what that does. It's going to generate snow all over our terrain, covering the entire thing. And it does smooth it out along all of the edges, but depending on what smoothness you choose, it's going to generate it a little differently. So the way I think of it in my experimenting with this, because I haven't used this command a whole lot, I just learned how to use it, but in my experimenting, the smoother that you make the snow, imagine that it's going to collect in the lower parts of your terrain. So the smoother I make it, the more it's going to gather in all those lower portions of the terrain, and the higher parts will be more bare. Let me just demonstrate a little further. We'll do a smooth snow of 6, a little bit higher than before, but you'll see how it's going to generate differently in different areas. It's going to tend to collect more down here than it is up here, so it just tends to redistribute the snow in a different way. The next thing that we can add to this command is a mask. I'm going to run through each thing one at a time. So we could, if we wanted to, mask the grass block so that our snow is only being placed on the grass. So let's do that. And it should only distribute the snow in areas of grass. You'll see it even put it some underwater because I had some of those underwater blocks as grass. After the mask, you can enter a pattern and additional height to the snow. Typically, you want to build snow on snow, so you'd probably do a pattern of snow and then add an additional height. It could be any number, but let's just try a low number like 1. What we're saying here is we're placing the snow on grass blocks, but we're also placing additional snow 1 block above that. So that's what the last 2 numbers are. It's adding height to what we have with an additional block of snow. It's probably going to look very similar, but you'll see we're going to get that additional height of snow, which just added a lot. And I think it also added a lot more because I built snow on top of snow. If I undid everything, let me undo all this stuff again. If I started from a blank slate and did that, it's not going to cover everything, I don't think, because it's not building on top of what we already had. But it does cover most of it. You get the idea. I want to show you how extreme this last number can be. If we made it something like 4, and I'm going to make this smooth snow up here. I'm going to make this a higher number too, just so it's a little bit easier to see. We'll make it, actually let's try 8. So if we tried something like this, the best thing to do with this command I find is just to experiment. But you see, I added an extra height to that snow, and look at what it's done. It's added all this extra snow everywhere. It stacked it up on everything except the stone because we didn't mask the stone. So that's a really cool feature that you can do with it. I'm getting a bit carried away playing around with this command, but I really quickly do need to show you the -O flag, which is used to overlay the snow on top of the existing blocks instead of replacing the blocks underneath. So first, let me do the command smooth snow without the -O flag, and we'll see what it does. It should be overlaying some blocks, but then other blocks it will completely be replacing. And I don't know if there's a good way to demonstrate this other than me just standing here and showing you that these are snow blocks. And then if we redo that same command with -O, it shouldn't replace these with snow. Instead, they should still be grass. So now if I break this, these are still grass blocks, and it's just placing the snow on top. What a beautiful landscape we have made just with 3 simple commands. I hope you found this video helpful. I absolutely love the Terragen command, and these other commands I showed you like river and smooth snow, I haven't actually used them myself in my builds, but I can see them being very helpful, especially when trying to lay out a map really quickly. Of course, you can always build off of these commands. You don't have to exclusively use them, but they do make a great foundation for more complex terrain and are great to use for a very basic terrain if that's all you need. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I have more Arceon tutorials as well as other general building tutorials out there if you're interested. Have a great day and have fun building!